In the previous lab, you were introduced to some very basic Unix concepts. You were introduced to the command line and some commands that you could run on the command line. For example, ls, which would list the contents of a directory, mkdir, which you could use to make a new directory, cd, which you could use to change your current location to a new directory or path on your file system, pwd to print the current directory location, cp to copy a file to another location on your file system, rm and rmdir to remove files and directories, cat or cat to print the contents of a file to your terminal screen, and mv or move to remove or rename a file. You also learned about the text editor gedit that you could use to open and edit a file. You were also introduced to the important concept of a path, which corresponds to a specific location on the file system. It is critical to specify the correct path to a file or directory when running various commands. This ensures that the terminal can properly locate a file that you are trying to access, but also that the proper outputs get produced. When we think of paths, we can think of them as being either a full path or a relative path. A full path corresponds to the complete location of a file or directory on the file system, starting from the root. For example, the complete location of MP651 on our file system would correspond to home, neuro, desktop, MP651. A relative path corresponds to the location of a file or directory relative to your current location on the file system. It does not start with the root directory. For example, if while logged into, if on our terminal and we were inside our home file system location, the relative path to MP651 would then be neuro and MP651. Note that it does not start with slash, as that would denote the root directory. Here in this exercise, we'll begin to learn we'll dig deeper into the finer details of full and relative paths. Try this out using your terminal and following along with the commands that are specified. For example, these exercises will give you more experience and provide additional examples of using either a full or relative path. Remember that for this example, your current location on the file system will be your desktop. Therefore, a relative path will be relative to your desktop. For example, let's break down these first two commands. First, we're asking you to copy file1.txt from your desktop to a lab2 folder that you will create. The first file1.txt corresponds to a full path of file1. Note that it starts with root and specifies that entire location of file1 on your file system. The second argument for copy is the full path to the lab2 folder that you will create. Again, the path starts with the root directory and corresponds to that full path to lab2. The second command that you will use to copy file2 to lab2 corresponds to a relative path. Note that we do not have a path that starts with the root, and also that is just the actual file name. So file2 is relative to the desktop. The relative path to the lab2 folder in this case, therefore, is also just the lab2 folder as specified here. Note that this command is much simpler to implement. You're not having to spell out all the full paths of each of the file2 and lab2 directories. Now, if instead of our current location being at the desktop, but rather was inside the lab2 folder, our relative path command will slightly change. The command that would use full paths would not change, however. For running the command using relative paths, the command would change like so. Instead of file2 being relative to the desktop, file2 now corresponding to a relative path to the lab2 folder would look something like this. It would be / file2.txt corresponding to the .. corresponding to the directory before lab2, i.e. the desktop, and this dot is a special character that is used to specify your current location. So this command is, again, saying to copy file2, which exists one directory above the current location, and telling the terminal to copy it to our current location, which is inside the lab2 folder. You just learned some other special characters that can be used for file system paths. The single dot corresponds to our current file system location, whereas the ... corresponds to going back one directory from your current location. Try this out. From your desktop folder, Home Neuro Desktop, try navigating to your home directory, Home Neuro, using the special character ... A couple more things on paths. When naming directories and files, it will be very much more convenient to avoid using any spaces between words in the names. For example, don't create a new folder with a space in between it like so. Rather, do something more like this, where you either don't have new spaces or don't have any spaces between your words, or you can separate spaces using an underscore. When there are spaces in the path, special characters are needed to let the terminal know that there is a space in the name. For example, if you were to create the directory home neuro new folder with a space, then the command to move to this directory would be more complicated than just cd home neuro new folder with a space. It would look like so. You would need this extra / or backslash to concatenate new and folder together. In general, spaces in names are a bad idea. They can make your commands much more difficult to implement and run on the terminal. Okay, we're going to try to put all the pieces that you've currently learned using basic Unix commands together in one, using the following steps. After completing these, show the TA in your breakout room that you've done these steps properly, or ask any questions that you may have.